but you are treated like we are. Now, didn't I just say this the other day? I didn't know Bernie Sanders was going to say that. I said we live in the richest country in the world with the most resources.
He's listening to Bernie. Thank you, Bernie. Well, were you not a Christian 9 years ago on CNN, Don? He was saying the same thing. Or were you just not allowed to say this?
He's like, I didn't know Bernie was going to say that. The one thing that he says over and over and over again.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up.
Morning Joe, who cradled Donald Trump's balls for most of 2015 and 2016. You remember they had Donald Trump calling in to the show 2-3 times a week. There was that clip of them in between a commercial of their interview, like joking around, like, hey, let's, Trump like, yeah, let's make me look good here. And them, oh, of course, Joe and Mika were laughing. They were Team Hillary. And then in 2020, anybody but Bernie. They are also suddenly airing Bernie Sanders rallies and speaking relatively favorable for the cocktail crowd cabal that's usually on set there. Colin, let's play some of that.
That is not democracy. And our fight is to make sure that we remain a democracy. One person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections.
Lisa, I want to talk about the populism that we saw with Bernie Sanders. And you were saying it's so funny. You were saying while you were watching it, what Simone said, which is, people trust him because this is what he's been saying. I mean,
for decades.
For decades. And we just heard Steve Bannon's name mentioned there. What's so incredible is that there's a lot that you hear from the left in populism that you hear from the Steve Bannon wing on economic populism about, tax cuts for the rich not being the right thing and actually breaking up monopolies being the right thing to do. It's very interesting.
Interesting. Joe Scarborough with a little glitter in his eye about Bernie's populism. Again, as a rule,
knowing he's going to crush it if it actually builds.
As a rule of thumb, I try not to relitigate things from 10 years ago, but I do think it's relevant because it just shows you, yes, corporate media and its influence and power, thankfully, it has been diminishing. However, as I always have to point out, and some viewers get mad because they think I'm talking about them, the bottom line is the most consistent voter in America, unfortunately, Zaina, correct me if I'm wrong, is still older voters. They come out for midterms. They come out for every local election. They come out in off-election years, like this year, for governor's races. They'll come out for a state Supreme Court race, right? They definitely come out for presidential elections. And most older voters, this is the demographic of definitely Fox News, definitely MSNBC, definitely CNN. Now, there's plenty of older boomers that are with it and watch independent media and have not watched CNN or any of this trash for years. But I could tell you, having been on the ground, I could tell you, having been on the ground and interviewing a lot of older folks, a lot of their talking points come straight out of the mouth of Morning Joe or Rachel Maddow or name your CNN gas bag, and of course, Fox News. So it is relevant that it shows you, if this man, Bernie Sanders, we used to have something called the fairness doctrine where you had to show equal time for candidates, right? If this man would have had a fair shake, would have had equal coverage, if his rallies would have got even 7 to 10 minutes live in 2016, even, I think, a tenth, 25% of the coverage of Donald Trump, I think it would have potentially changed history because most of his policies were aligned with even a lot of normie Dems. The problem was normie Dems were fed this steady diet of propaganda and bullshit by Morning Joe and CNN and the rest of them that this guy was radical or the elusive swing voter was turned off by free healthcare, even though the polls say otherwise. the elusive swing voter or independent voter was turned off by free college or, the word socialism, even though by the polls, he always did very, very well than his opponent. He did better than his opponents among independents and conservative voters. So it just shows you that essentially these people are all like fake journalists with makeup on that will do a blackout of candidates when those candidates actually could threaten power. And then if those candidates have no threat at all, I mean, he's having big rallies, but he's not a political threat. He's 83. It's just not practical that he's going to run for president again. Suddenly, MSNBC sees where the wind is going. MSNBC sees even a lot of their audience is starting to jump onto the Bernie wave, starting to get fed up with the spineless shit fucks in the Democratic Party. They're airing Bernie's streams. But I want to show Don Lemon, who all of a sudden, he went from, remember when he said, pick up your pants to black kids?
Oh, yeah.
And he went to, I'm not a progressive, I'm kind of an independent. Now let's hear him on Bernie.
Let's take you to the rally now. We'll get to that. Don't worry about it. Let's take you to the rally now. Let's go to Bernie Sanders at this rally in the amphitheater. 50,000 people, not even an election year. We barely just got past the election that happened in November. Bernie Sanders, we are not a poor country, but you are treated like we are. Now, didn't I just say this the other day? I didn't know Bernie Sanders was going to say that. I said we live in the richest country in the world with the most resources. When did it become bad to help people and to look out for our fellow men and our neighbors and our people even who don't live in America? Why is shutting down USAID a bad thing when it helps so many people around the world? Isn't that Christian values? Isn't that just doing unto others? Bernie Sanders.
If we were a poor country, I would come before you and I'd say, I'm sorry that you got to work 50 hours a week. I'm sorry that you really have to do dangerous and dirty work. I am sorry that you can't afford to send your kid to college. I'm sorry that the elementary school your kid goes to is inadequate or that you can't afford childcare. But we're a poor country. We just can't afford that. We are not a poor country.
Thank you, Bernie.
There is no excuse in God's earth that people have to make a choice between food and the medicine they need to stay alive.
He's right. God, I mean, I never thought of myself like as this crazy, raging progressive. I am a Christian. But now I feel like, I guess in the Republicans' terms, maybe I'm a progressive. Because I think we should be doing as much as possible.
Holy cow.
To help people. People are finally listening to Bernie.
Don Lemon has found Jesus. Hallelujah.
Here comes the loaves and fishes, finally.
He said,
oh, man.
He's listening to Bernie. Thank you, Bernie. Well, were you not a Christian 9 years ago on CNN, Don? He was saying the same thing. Or were you just not allowed to say this?
He's like, I didn't know Bernie was going to say that. The one thing that he says over and over and over again.
Zaina, listen, if we want to build out the movement, we have to be open to Johnny-come-latelys. I'm totally fine with those that evolve. But there's a difference between those that are seeing the light genuinely. Welcome. We want to widen the tent, not in, corporate Democrat speak of we're a big tent so we could have, those that believe in Medicare for all and those that are purchased, by the for-profit healthcare system. I'm not talking about opening the tent that wide, but we could have folks that are more moderate, but all believe in the same values, folks that are starting to see, hey, maybe populist progressive value policies are
right.
Yeah. But I'm not welcoming Don Lemon into my tent because this is not genuine or Morning Joe or all these fucks. This is, hey, I'm going where the wind is now, because it's not only the lefties that we could institute our media blackout on. Now it's our viewers. What's that?
But this reminds me of in our independent media space, this reminds me of like the Jimmy Dores and the TUITs that all of a sudden, you know, went toward Trump. You know, Jimmy's been doing it for a while because that's where the money's at. And then TUIT started doing it during the election, and then a lot after the election since Trump won, going and shifting right, because that's where the money is. These people from CNN, MSNBC are now, they shifted to the right during the election. They shifted to the right directly after Trump. Don Lemon did a whole episode about why woke made Kamala lose, which was absolutely bonkers. And then a week later turns around and goes, I didn't know Bernie was saying these things. That ain't authentic. I'm sorry.
But I got news for you. I mean, I can't speak to all of the folks out there, but Colin, if you have the clip, Tina interviewed, I mean, if you Google dictionary definition of normie Democrat, this guy would come up. Tina was at the Bernie rally in Las Vegas. We aired the whole thing live. We have other interviews we posted over the weekend, so check those out. And she interviewed, he calls himself a moderate Democrat. He had a resist shirt on. I'm sure he was kind of with the original resistance of Trump 1.0. Well, I mean, hear what he had to say. This was at the Bernie rally.
I'm furious. Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. I have been a lifelong Democrat. I've been a Democrat since the 70s. Long time. And I am done with that. I am what you used to consider a moderate. And I'm still the same person. They changed. Schumer changed. This resist means something. Resist. That's my attitude. Fight back. And Schumer, I'm done with. The only way it's recoverable is for us. I cannot count on my senators. The House stood up and did their thing. Senators aren't going to stand up for us. Cortez Masto didn't. I think it's left to us. I've given up on them as being an out.
I mean, listen, if we sat down for coffee or a beer, maybe we don't agree on everything, but it sure sounds he's closer to the Bernie left than the Pelosi Schumer right. And that's a lot of the normies now. The MSNBC viewers, you know, the folks that watch PBS, the folks that read the New York Times, they might still need a little convincing in terms of Medicare for all, or a little softening of the word socialism, because they came up in like the 70s and the 80s where it was all propagandized and socialism became a boogeyman. But a lot of these normies, their viewers, Don Lemon's traditional viewers and Morning Joe's traditional viewers, they're coming over to Bernie. Forget the policy for a second, because he's actually fighting because he doesn't have any donors that he has to appease. He doesn't have any donors that he has to get their permission before putting out a policy, or he could only go so far, or it's going to alienate his donors because his policies they don't like. And I just find it, people need to realize, and this is not just, we're not, you know, to people already on the left and who were Bernie, I'm not breaking news to you, but I think we have more newer viewers. I have found we have newer viewers who have tuned out from MSNBC and traditional media are tuning in here. We have some MAGA types who watch. People need to realize, whether it's MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, it's infotainment. It's corporate infotainment. This is not news. If it was news, they would have been airing 40,000 people in Washington Square Park for Bernie Sanders. Didn't have to air the whole thing, but they should have covered those types of things. And I can tell you, because I covered probably 30 or 40 Bernie rallies, they were not showing most of them. They were not covering most of them. They were not interviewing people. When they were covering Bernie, it was to push that his supporters are racist, sexist, and all the rest of it.
And there's one other thing, Jordan. When you talk about policy, I've organized in 18 states. I've knocked doors in 9 states. I've talked to tens of thousands of voters. I've done interviews. I've done the research. I talked to normies. I talked to all kinds of people, and we're actually not that far away on policy. I've even talked to conservatives. I'm not talking about like MAGA, diehard Trump supporters or as extreme as some people have gotten now. But most people want education for their kids paid for by our tax dollars. Most people want health care for everybody. Most people agree. Most of the country wants tuition-free K through 12. They also want early child care. They want family paid leave. All of these things are extremely popular. And, you know, people like Don Lemon or whoever else have been lying. This guy that's a moderate, if you sat down with him, I can't read his mind, and I'm not going to assume, but there's a good chance that a lot of these policies that I have mentioned, he would call himself a centrist and support all of those policies. But the people that shill for these corporations, at the mainstream media organizations like CNN and MSNBC don't want you to know it is popular. So now they're going to show you Bernie because, you know, I think in part because they're afraid somewhat of this insane fascism that's been impacting the rest of us for 30 years is now finally going to come home to roost, maybe for them.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's part of it. But these policies are popular, actually. They are. And now they're getting uprooted. What little social safety nets we have are getting uprooted. And we're seeing the response to that.